In this time, sharing vision and context is critical. I found that marketers crave for and thrive with more context.
This is Velocitize Talks. I'm Eric Jones. I'm here with Cameron Van Orman, the CMO of Planview. Cameron, it's great to have you.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Cameron, tell us a little bit about Planview and your unique value proposition in the marketplace.
Absolutely. Look, in today's disruptive markets are driving organizations to rewire as they deal with a bunch of changes. They're dealing with a changing world of work. They're trying to create an innovative culture, tapping and harnessing the broad employee base. They're trying to realize Agile, but do it at scale. And they're trying to make the product shift focus less on projects, more products and experiences. Planview has the full spectrum of portfolio management and work management solutions that help companies connect strategy and delivery.
So tell us a little bit about Agile. For a long time, that's been a methodology that's been used by software developers. Tell us how it's beginning to be used by marketers as well now.
Look, Agile has a 15-year plus history in software development, but marketing suffers from many of the same functional elements that software development did that drove and precipitated that change to Agile. Slow, hierarchical, silo-driven organization, drowning in work, constant fire drills, hard to prioritize. Sometimes we actually fail to deliver, or we deliver the wrong thing. And it's tough to deal with that level of change and responsiveness that's needed, and sometimes that's low morale.
Tell us, so talking about everything speeding up and broad acceleration across the board, with the pandemic, talk a little bit about how much more relevant Agile is today, given everything that that many companies are facing across the board with COVID.
From a marketing point of view, like many, we had to reevaluate all our marketing campaigns, programs, tactics, channels. Because we were Agile, we could pivot and we could change the focus of our cross-functional go-to-market teams. And we knew they would pivot as a group and that all the shared services functions that are aligned would support the pivots as well. Like if we'd been traditionally operating in these functional silos, we'd still be negotiating and trading off various departmental objectives because those have been such ingrained with specific departmental success factors or worse.
So you talked about, reviewing marketing, some of the pivots that you underwent as part of your processes after the pandemic hit. What do you think is going to be the biggest change that we see across the board in marketing organizations as a result of the pandemic?
Probably stating the obvious, but it's going to be far more digital. But digital that's deeply anchored to buying groups and the aligned digital and still human interactions that's required to progress these different personas in a buying group through a congruent buying journey. So far more digital.
And talk a little bit about what that means, from an internal perspective. You obviously find yourself managing a lot more, remote teams from, digital perspective. Talk a little bit about how that's going and how you're dealing with some of those challenges / opportunities.
In this time, sharing vision and context is critical. I found that marketers crave for and thrive with more context. So in our PI or program increment planning, we dedicate a bunch of time up front to having our executives. Last one, we had our CEO, chief product officer, head of sales, myself, spend time up front sharing the company strategy, the product strategy, the sales strategy, to give the teams as much information as we can to help them focus and help them make the right business impacting adjustments and decisions without having to run everything up the flagpole. With remote teams, now that we're in an increasingly remote environment, it is so critical that what is delivered doesn't drift from what is needed. So we find lots of communication, but given vision and context, push that information down to the team so they can make the decisions.
Cameron, tell us a little bit about the myths of PI planning. One of them is that everybody needs to be co-located. Obviously, that's not the case for a lot of businesses today. We're all working remote. And could you share how you yourself recently underwent an entire virtual PI planning workshop and how you tackled that?
Absolutely. It's a huge myth that Agile only works with co-located teams. Look, it is certainly easier to do and easier to get started when you have a small cross-functional team, whether it's sitting across a kitchen table or sitting in a small office. But Agile is more critical the larger and more distributed the team is. Yes, it makes it harder to get going, but the benefits are greater. The larger the team, the more distributed and the stronger the departmental managers. That means these silos are more entrenched than ever, right? Really strong leaders, really strong silos, leads to this siloed priorities or metrics that's sub-optimizing. So while it's easier to get started with a smaller team, it's actually far more impactful and far more critical the more distributed and the larger and the more siloed your team is.
And how about from a tools or programs perspective, any that you use that helped facilitate that whole virtual program increment planning process that you did?
Absolutely. As we thought about our last PI planning, which was our 6th that we've done in our journey towards Agile, and we had to go to 100% remote. The first thing we had to realize is Zoom fatigue is real, right? We restructured our content down from 2.5 full days to 4 half days. We did it in the mornings so that Europe could attend live. They used to attend just half of the sessions and then try and listen to recordings of the rest. We had more rotating breakouts. Frankly, because we were virtual, pop-ins from executives or stakeholders were less intrusive. We could just sort of listen into a recording and keep the camera off as opposed to physically looming over people's shoulders. And then we did lots of prep, lots of training, what to expect, how to prepare. We added more facilitators to the breakout sessions.
I would say one of PI planning's strengths is it's not about, sort of the waterfall events. It's more about the journey, right? What are you looking at now? What are you sort of tackling next as far as your journey is concerned? And how are you thinking about the remainder of the year, given we're about halfway through now?
You're right. It is absolutely a journey. It is funny, and people have kind of waterfall concepts to apply to an Agile transformation. Look, we made great progress in the first several steps. We started with executive alignment. Don't underappreciate how important that is. Then we formed teams. We reformed teams. We didn't do it right the first time. We established all the team level processes and cadence, trusting. How do the teams trust the process? What does it mean to be dedicated to a cross-functional team? How do we think about capacity and work and process limits? And then we worked and built on that program layer. How do we escalate risks? How do we work cross teams? How do we think about shared services and the alignment? How do we think about Agile steering cadences and an Agile program management board using Lean Kit? And most recently, all virtual PI planning and our alignment with international. International used to just catch the work, and then we worked on being aligned with the work. Now, this last time, we got them together. And frankly, virtual PI planning or adjustment to the calendar allowed us to be more engaged full-time in PI planning to co-create the work that's coming.
So also in your role as CMO, I'd imagine, culture fits in as one of your areas of responsibility as well. How have you helped, retain some of the culture of Planview, even though everybody's distributed and nobody's in an office anymore?
One of the things we learned is not every interaction needs to be a formal Zoom call. People were getting Zoom burned out. So we said, look, sometimes it's Slack, sometimes actually pick up the phone. But we're also encouraging casual interactions. All the formal meetings, we figured out how to lift and port into this kind of virtual environment. But you miss some of that water cooler where culture and trust and creativity. So we encourage casual interactions with the team. One of the teams says wind down Wednesdays, others have happy hours. And then our message to all of us and our managers, be approachable, be tolerant, be flexible. Like whether it's on hours, many hours may be non-traditional. Like life may collide with business meetings, and it's okay. So we've really sort of adjusted our expectations there. we've got to be human through all this and respect people's boundaries and barriers and challenges that they may be having individually.
So another question that I have for you is, what's the best piece of professional advice that you've ever been given?
It's going to sound counterintuitive, but it's don't try and be right 100% of the time. Because if that's your objective, you won't make enough decisions, or you'll be too slow and late in making them. And so it's kind of like, be right more than you're wrong, obviously, but make lots of decisions. And look, when you make a wrong decision or turns out to be wrong, don't compound it by hiding it or failing to admit it or being embarrassed by it. Own it and follow it up quickly with the right decision.
So one of the questions we love asking our guests is a book or podcast that you'd like to recommend to our viewers.
Absolutely. I'd say one I enjoyed reading most recently was called The $1 Trillion Coach. And it was a leadership playbook from a famous executive coach in Silicon Valley called Bill Campbell. It was written by Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google for a long time. And it was about how a football coach, Bill Campbell, became a sales guy. Then he became the CEO of Intuit. And then he became kind of an influential mentor to dozens of leaders, including Steve Jobs and the Google founders themselves. And Eric Schmidt illustrates and shares Coach Bill, as he called him, his leadership and mentorship playbook. And if I had to summarize it roughly, definitely read the book. It was about compassion, a blueprint for compassion, how to create higher performing, faster moving cultures, teams, and companies, but really being human centric.
That was phenomenal, Cameron. Thanks so much for that. That was Cameron Van Orman, the CMO of Planview.